Welcome back to the Higher Love with Megan podcast. I've been gone from this space for a while, and it feels good to be returning with renewed purpose and intention. Time away from something always incites a period of reflection and reorientation, and in this episode I want to share what I've been up to behind the scenes over the past year and what this has ignited in terms of what and how I want my podcast to stand for going forward. I started the Higher Love with Megan podcast at the end of 2021 as a bit of a passion project within my business. I'd always wanted a forum to share my thoughts and voice and collaborate with great guests to educate and inspire listeners within the realm of holistic health. My interest in education within the holistic health arena is diverse, considering my background in yoga, my segue into holistic well-being through healing my own body and restoring my cycle naturally from PCOS, my training as a holistic health and integrative nutritionist with the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, my further training in emotional freedom technique or EFT or tapping, and the abundance of friends that I've made and facilitators that I've encountered living in London, Australia, Bali and Brighton, spanning 9 years in this field. Since 2021, I've interviewed a myriad of brilliant guests on wide-ranging topics for the mind, body, soul, intended to inspire and empower listeners within their own health, healing and transformation. It has also granted me the opportunity to collaborate with others when solopreneuring can otherwise be a, solo venture. Within this time, my podcast has become the greatest source of fun, creativity, and fulfillment within my work, and I'm so grateful for these online platforms that mean that we can connect with others all over the world, anywhere, anytime, and I'm grateful too for you, the listeners, who've tuned in with these episodes so far. Over the past 18 months, my world has taken a deep dive, embarking upon the 1-year Compassionate Inquiry training, led by and based upon the teachings of Dr. Gabor Maté and his profound body of work within the realm of trauma and addiction, and further developed by Satdaram Kaur. Over the years, working as a coach and EFT practitioner, I've come to recognize that there is so much more to healing than simply just talking about our issues in a conventional way. That is, there's so much beyond simply working with the conscious mind, which is why I trained in a way that approaches healing through the subconscious, through the body, through the nervous system, and through energetics. For a long time, I witnessed coaching clients coming up time and time again against the same blocks, the same patterns causing them to wonder what they're missing, what they're doing wrong, or a varying iteration of what is wrong with them. I came to understand that at the root of so many of our coping strategies, adaptive behaviors, defenses, the very things that keep us stuck and cause us to suffer was trauma. Trauma is a massively misunderstood topic within our society. For example, a lot of people think that they have no trauma because fortunately nothing, in inverted commas, massively bad has befallen them. Also, a lot of people too who have experienced immense scales of atrocities or misfortune regard themselves as permanently flawed or broken beyond repair as a result of the events that they've experienced. What I've come to understand about trauma through the teachings of Dr. Maté is that trauma is not the event itself, but the wound that is created within you as a result of the event. It is the disconnection to self or the world that is generated as a result, the beliefs, the decisions that you made at the time that come to underpin the way that you see all future situations. It's the way that the event limits you or your ability to respond and choose. The way that you remain stuck or limited by the consequential behaviors, defenses, and coping strategies that you employ to keep yourself safe and alive, but then create additional suffering in your life. What this means is that just because nothing, in inverted commas, major has befallen your life, your earlier childhood experiences, regardless of how insignificant they seem to the adult mind, can create huge chasms of insecurity that run our lives and become the filter through which we see and experience ourselves and the world. I'm yet to meet a human who does not, in some way, conscious or unconscious, not feel enough, or even the opposite, feels too much. I'm yet to meet a human who feels utterly whole, perfect and complete within themselves. Obviously, there are varying degrees of this and people's general sense of connection to themselves and the world, indicating, for example, why some war veterans go off to war and experience PTSD and others don't, so much of which goes back to the early childhood experiences which create the pattern for that person to experience the world around them. But if we zoom out, we need only look at the state of our individual and collective physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health to recognize that none of us are immune within the society that we live in. And so much of our experiences and the way that we're all living affects us on a personal level within our own lives, but also en masse. We live in a society deeply affected by global, collective, and intergenerational traumas, absorbed into the very fabric of our culture, our outlook, and our institutions. Having completed the 1-year Compassionate Inquiry training, I am now in the further 6-month Compassionate Inquiry mentorship program. But I would like to speak to my experience over the 1-year foundational training. What I can say is that it was a single most profound journey of healing I've ever embarked upon, both for myself as well as the way that I work professionally with clients and the lens through which I've come to see the world in general. Suffice to say, as the demands of the course crescendoed towards the end of the last year, my time and capacity for some things, including my podcast, was reduced. In fact, in the last few months of last year, every ounce of my free time was dedicated to the training. And if anyone asked me what I did in 2023, I replied that I watched 360 videos on trauma, attended 50 supervisions, 25 cohort calls, and wrote 25 case studies, which goes a long way to explain my absence from podcasting since November. However, taking my foot off the podcasting gas, I was able to take a step back and discover that I was beginning to embody a new why within my work. Nice and timely, seeing as astrologically, if that is your language, I'm at the very start of a year 1 of a 9-year cycle. Times are a-changing. So where are we going from here? For one, I think it's really important that we start talking about trauma. With the amazing work of trauma giants such as Gabor Maté, Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk, Dr. Stephen Porges, and many more, and the great invention, for better or worse, of the internet and social media, trauma is becoming much more of a household term, perhaps even a buzzword, with more and more trainings, certifications, and practitioners aligning with the word trauma-informed. Getting to the root cause of the patterns in our lives, seeing ourselves as the way that we truly are, processing our pain, understanding our coping strategies, and really moving towards wholeness is really what sets us free. And when we can do this, we can show up fully and authentically for the benefit of ourselves and the world. In addition, talking about trauma means that our physical, mental, and emotional challenges can transition from a me problem into more of an us problem. The conversation that follows from trauma invites us to zoom out and witness how we find ourselves in a society where physical, mental, and emotional challenges are rife. It is not a personal issue, it is a collective phenomenon. The title of Dr. Gabor Maté's most recent book, The Myth of Normal, expands on this very topic, centralizing around healing within a toxic culture. When we can look at the collective and intergenerational wounds which have contributed to this state of our health and institutions, we can begin to look at healing en masse. We also start joining dots, such as how the vast majority of people who commit crimes have a higher ACEs scale, that is, adverse childhood experiences, than people who do not commit crimes. How the individual's likelihood to reoffend is increased with how much childhood trauma the individual experienced. The connection too between certain chronic diseases and specific traumas. It seems like if there is a way for us to move forward as a society, we can no longer perpetuate the same cycles by neglecting trauma-informed awareness within our healthcare, education, and prison systems. I'm personally fascinated by the way that we label and treat people who break laws in comparison to tribal cultures who, when someone breaks a rule, look upon it as a breakdown in the entire network of community in which they live. I'm interested in what has gone so endemically wrong in our society at large that people feel so alien, so disconnected, so isolated, so choiceless, that living outside of it is the best option that they have. During the compassionate inquiry training, I found myself increasingly drawn to Dr. Gabor Maté's interviews with Black, Indigenous, and people of colour educators, therapists, authors, researchers, and activists in the area of non-white trauma and well-being. I've been immensely impacted by confronting questions, such as whether we can really consider ourselves trauma-informed when we are not race-informed. I've been made acutely aware of my own discomfort amidst this conversation. I'll cite here one example where Gabor's discussion with a Black educator became so poignant that people were writing into the chat that they had hit their capacity and needed to leave to take care of themselves, only to have that rebuked by the guest as white privilege exemplified, that we, as white people, get to leave a conversation as soon as it becomes too much in comparison to the enduring daily experience of marginalised non-white societies whose historical repression continues to exist today via outwards, institutional and systemic racism. I was challenged, yet inspired by his invitation to notice our discomfort, learn to be with it and stay in the conversation. To stay in the room despite being uncomfortable, to stay in the room because we feel uncomfortable. I've been outraged and moved to tears multiple times by the stories of Indigenous peoples whose ancestors had their lands taken away to become what we call Canada and the States, whose grandparents grew up in residential schools, and whose population today face abhorrent statistics for drug and alcohol addiction, crime, prison, chronic disease, and mental health. These statistics sit in direct correlation with their level of collective and intergenerational trauma, the disconnection they have experienced from their roots and traditions, and the marginalised role that they are offered within Western society. I've been awestruck by people who, in the process of reclaiming their ancestral roots and cultures, their medicines, their language, their songs, who still have an overspill of love and healing to dedicate to the overall healing of our planet, despite their anger and their pain of what has happened to them. And of course, the atrocities that we have witnessed over the past 9 months. As a result, I've realised a lot about myself and my situation. Over the past months, I've come to perceive myself as living within an echo chamber of wellness. More than that, as a white, middle-class, privileged female, I've realised that I do not simply exist within an echo chamber. I am the echo chamber. And that is not said with shame. It's not meant to denote myself or others like me as having failed or having done something wrong, and again make it a me-based issue. It is simply a fact. As a blonde, naturally brunette, white woman, born into a middle-class family in England, a lot of people like me can look upon health, healing, and transformation as something that is nice to have. I'm not saying this to compare suffering because there's very little point in that. And in reality, the vast majority of people are healing very real wounding, navigating challenging parental or family dynamics, have been impacted by damaging early experiences, things which have created significant rupture in people's lives. However, it is important to recognise that a lot of self-development does exist within an air of privilege. For example, when we talk about fulfillment, purpose and mission, we must recognise this as existing within the luxury of having choice in these areas of our life. Similarly, many of us have the perfect storm of time, space and money to invest in opportunities that are designed for us, to share our voice in an area that is orchestrated with our voices in favour, and as a result can largely conduct ourselves and our practices within a vacuum. It's just currently how it is. What I've realised though is I don't want to exist in a vacuum anymore. I don't want to promote health, healing and transformation as if it is invented by white privileged people for white privileged people. I want to start staying in the room. There are some rooms that I haven't even entered yet, and as time goes on, I want to start creating these rooms and get my feet and the feet of others firmly under the table. I want to start asking deeper questions of myself and my guests on this podcast. I want to understand how we can live better, how we can support one another, hear one another better, and parent our children and ourselves better. I want to discuss the elephants in the room, address the huge collective traumas that we continue to perpetuate from generation to generation. I want to talk about things like Why is it that 38.7% of American prison inmates are black when they make up only 13.6% of the population? Or why 27% of Canadian inmates are Indigenous when they make up only 5% of the population? Why is asthma and asthma-related hospitalizations, why are they disproportionately higher in black and ethnic minority people? Why certain chronic conditions mirror the intensity of trauma that certain demographics have been subjected to? I want to start new conversations and open up new windows in the minds of all of us as a community of listeners and learners together. I personally believe that if our institutions were trauma-informed, if our healthcare systems, our education systems, our criminal justice systems understood the impact of personal, collective and intergenerational and institutional trauma upon behaviour, choices and well-being, we would live in a very different world. I also believe, I have to believe, that we are going in the right direction. This can be hard when we look around and see violence, hatred, genocide, mass repression of women, marginalisation of cultures and whole populations of people. But I do believe and trust in the inherent goodness of the human spirit. I do believe that we are existing in an era of more people waking up, more people questioning and more people advocating for something better. I don't believe that humans will create a very different world within my lifetime, or perhaps even the lifetime of my children. Yet there are mottos which I hold dear, being, the true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. Similarly, Gabor Maté cites an invitation from a Jewish rabbi who lived 100 years before Jesus. The task is not yours to finish, but neither are you free not to take part in it. Meaning that individually the task of collective healing and collective transformation is not the sole responsibility of any one of us, but neither is it plausible for us to not in some way contribute to it. We must all do this with the absolute acceptance that we may never benefit personally from the fruits of our labour, but neither must that deter us from the vision that so many of us share. A vision that we might be able to in some way salvage and create a better society. A better world for no reason other than it is what is good and right, that aligns with love and freedom and the values which the cosmos innately embodies. I want to contribute to a society where we continually strive to truly live better, to love better, to parent better, and to atone for the dreadful things that we have bestowed upon one another over the millennia. And to do this, we can't play it small. We can't sit on our hands. We can't create better health and being just for some of our world. Some years ago, I called my business Higher Love. It started with a tattoo that a friend chose for me as a metaphor for the journey that I had been on, moving through the layers of my physical health, my mental, emotional and spiritual landscape into deeper authenticity and love for self and the world around me. The meaning of Higher Love continues to evolve and grow for me each day, and it seems to mean something slightly different for every person that I meet. We all have our own version of what higher love means to us. What I've realised to be the case is that by calling my business and my brand Higher Love, I set myself my own accountability benchmark, questioning on an ongoing basis how I can strip the layers off myself that I may more readily align to, embody and become higher love. What I also know now to be true is that higher love cannot exist for us personally or collectively when it relates to the enhancement of some peoples and not others. When health, healing and transformation is prized as more accessible to and for some people over others. The only way we can even consider moving forwards towards a place of higher love individually and collectively is if we aim for higher love for all. So where are we going next? Well, we're moving outside of the echo chamber, folks.
And in a time in my life where I'm really quite tired and depleted and sort of in the throes of motherhood and trying to keep going and going and going, I'd forgotten how restorative it can be to not only be in circle space, but to have that multi-generational perspective. It's really quite special.
You know, there's huge support for Palestine in Ireland because the Irish know about the colonisation that we experienced and the intergenerational impact of that. So I think it goes down to our bones, some of this stuff.
Like this idea that we teach people how to treat us, for example. Mm-hmm. So within that is this nugget of sort of acknowledgement that if we continue to accept certain behaviours from people, they're more likely to repeat them. If we are able to articulate and hold our boundaries more firmly, they're more likely to be respected. But what that doesn't account for is, people of colour don't teach white people to be racist to them. that, or, women in domestic abuse scenarios don't teach their partners to be abusive towards them. Yeah. And I think as an industry, including myself, coaching, wellness, I think we've just become so careless in this really ironic way in our pursuit of status for ourselves as individuals. I'll just say the most provocative thing, I'll say the most simple thing, I'll kind of try to have this like mic drop moment or this hot take that will get me followers or elevate me in people's minds. At what cost? Like a significant cost to people who are navigating real world problems.
We're going to think bigger. We're going to challenge ourselves. We're going to become a little bit uncomfortable. We're going to stay in the room. We're going to learn. We're going to unlearn. We're going to decolonize our minds and our hearts. We're going to become better allies and better ambassadors for the human race in general. We're going to collaborate on how we can do more of this together. It's going to be healing. It's going to be expansive. It might be a little bit bumpy, might be a little bit gritty. You might hear me getting my butt kicked a little bit by some guests when there are things that perhaps I hadn't even considered about the language that I use, my attitudes, my approaches. And I tell you what, I'm here for it. And I hope that you will join me on this journey outside of the echo chamber. I'd love to know how this episode lands for you. I'd love to hear your feedback, your takeaways, your requests, your insights. I'm here for it all. You can contact me via my Instagram at higherlove_with_Megan or via my website, higher-love.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode or found it thought-provoking, please do take a moment, and I mean this exact moment, because in 5 minutes you'll completely forget. So right now, rate and review this episode and this podcast and share and send on to anyone else who you think would align with what I have to say today. All of this is a massive support to helping more people find the podcast, helping me to collaborate with more and more great guests every week. Until next time, big love.